Hi everyone, this is going to be my review of the Aune B1 portable headphone amplifier. And before I start, I just want to thank Aune themselves for letting me be a part of this review tour. Only about 10 participants were able to get on this tour and extensively listen to the B1 for a 2-week period and provide some feedback to Aune by writing a review. So thank you very much to Aune for letting me be a part of this tour. Now, without further ado, I want to jump into the sound quality and kind of explain the methods that I use to do my test. So the B1 is a portable headphone amplifier, and so I wanted to see how it compares to other amplifiers I have. And I was using a FiiO HA-2 headphone switcher as an A/B switch to do comparisons between the different amplifiers. And so I actually did A/B tests and I volume matched them by ear to the best of my ability with pink noise as well as 1 kHz sine waves, and I used the HA-2 to switch between the two amplifiers and see what differences in sound I could hear. So by doing that, hopefully I will be able to provide some pretty accurate testing differences between the different amps I have, and I'll just briefly go over which amps I compared them to. So between the B1 and the OPPO HA-2, I actually thought the two sounded very similar. I found that the B1 was maybe slightly more grainy compared to the HA-2, and the HA-2 had slightly more treble extension. But basically, when you use the headphone switcher and you switch between the two, is very difficult to hear differences between them. So in that regard, I think the B1 is a pretty good amplifier next to the HA-2, and if you're looking for a portable headphone amplifier, the B1 might be the way to go since it's less expensive. Next up, I compared the B1 to the FiiO E12. I personally don't really like the sound of the E12 all that much, but I decided to do A/B tests between them anyway. One thing that I don't like about the E12 is that the volume knob is very limited to how much you can use it. For me, I listen to music at pretty quiet volume levels, so even just like the slightest touch of the volume knob makes it very loud. So in terms of the sound, the B1 definitely sounds a lot better to me than the E12. I found that the B1 has a much better instrument separation, better imaging, better bass definition, and better bass control. It also has kind of the same treble roll off as the E12, except the E12 sounds a lot more grainy in comparison to the B1. And I just overall found that the B1 just sounds a lot smoother next to the E12. And for the price, I definitely recommend the B1 over the E12, even though it is a little bit more pricey. I think the price difference is definitely justified. Next up in the amp comparisons that I did was the JDS Labs C5, or in my case the C5D, because my C5 unit is an older unit and it has a higher output impedance compared to the C5D and the newer revision of the C5. So I wanted to make a more fair comparison for recent iterations of the circuit. So compared to the C5D, I found that the B1 sounded a little bit different, just like the Objective 2, which I will explain a little bit later. But basically the B1 kind of has a wider sound stage and not as much depth, whereas the C5 has kind of a little more rounded sound stage. It's not as wide, but it has a little more depth within it. The instrument separation on the C5D is also a little bit better. The C5D, as I mentioned in my review, as well as the C5, it sounds a little bit bright to me. So between the area of like maybe 2 to 4 kilohertz, it's around the female vocal region, it sounds a little bit bright. And so when you're comparing the B1 to the C5, you can definitely hear the lack of brightness. However, the B1 still has a little bit of brightness on the upper mid-range area, which is around like maybe 5, 6, 7 kilohertz. So that's entering the lower treble region as well. So the B1 does sound a little bit bright up on the top there, but if you don't like the bright sound and kind of harshness of female vocals for your music, then maybe the C5D is not for you and the B1 is for you. Both units are about the same price. The B1 is 199 MSRP. The C5 is 189 MSRP, so they are very similar. And if you're comparing the two amps, I think it's a personal preference for different tastes of sound you like. I personally like the B1 just a little bit more than the C5, but the C5 does have good instrument separation and a little bit better imaging and a little bit more rounded soundstage, so it's really up to you for your personal preferences for which one you think would be better. And speaking of personal preferences, I was comparing the B1 to the Objective 2, which is one of my reference headphone amplifiers, and of course there's a huge difference in terms of size. One's probably more portable than the other. I don't think most people would consider the Objective 2 to be portable, but I decided to do comparisons between them anyway. Just like the C5, I think the Objective 2 has a slightly different flavor. It offers a more rounded soundstage than the B1, just like the C5. Also, the bass definition and bass control of the Objective 2 is better than the B1. The treble extension is also better on the Objective 2. The Objective 2 also doesn't sound as grainy and harsh at the 5, 6, 7 kilohertz region, and has a more laid back kind of sound, so it doesn't sound as harsh there. Also, the B1's instrument separation is bested by the Objective 2 just by a little bit. It's not too bad. Both have a very, very, very silent background, so it's very good for in-ear monitors or in-ear earphones, because if you hear the background hiss, that usually indicates that the background noise is going to influence the music a little bit. From my experience, it makes the instrument separation a little bit less. Just like the C5, there's very little background noise, so very good design for in-ear earphones for that regard. And that's my overall impressions of the sound between the different comparisons of amplifiers. All of my tests were done with the Objective DAC, and again volume matched by ear with pink noise and 1 kHz sine wave signals generated in Audacity, and used an AB switch to quickly switch between the two amplifiers. So, speaking about the B1 by itself, in terms of the sound quality as a whole, not compared to anything else, I think the B1 sounds a little bit warm between the upper bass and lower mid-range area, so it has some nice warmth. As I mentioned earlier, the soundstage is more wide than deep. And also the treble is a little bit rolled off at the top end, and it sounds a little bit grainy. And also, as I mentioned, there's the 5, 6, 7 kilohertz area-ish emphasis on the B1. So adds a little bit of liveliness to some things. In terms of the price, I think this is a really good sounding unit for the price that you pay, and I would definitely recommend this for a nice portable headphone amplifier. And on the side here, there are two switches to keep in mind. One of them is the gain switch. I received official confirmation from Aune that the gain switch on low outputs 3 volts RMS. The gain on high outputs 6.5 volts RMS. And that is actually a lot of voltage swing for a portable headphone amplifier. Usually portable amps are limited by the amount of voltage that the battery can output, and this has a plus minus 9 volt power system, so it's a very powerful unit in terms of driving high impedance loads, such as the AKG K240 monitor I have, which was measured by inner fidelity to have a an impedance of 688 ohms. So this is a very good test for testing how much voltage your amplifier can provide, and I thought it drove the K240 monitors pretty well. So very good design for voltage output. However, going to this switch, the Class A switch, The Class A amplifier within the B1 kind of limits how much current output the B1 can provide. And so that's kind of a bummer in terms of the design of power output. That means that the B1 cannot really provide a lot of current for some headphones, such as the HiFi-Man HE1000 I have here, which is a low impedance headphone and a medium sensitivity, which means it needs a good amount of current to sound loud. For my personal listening preferences, I don't really listen to music too loud, so for me the current limitation of the B1 wasn't a problem for me. It might be for others though who listen to their headphones at louder volume levels. So just keep that in mind for listening to the B1. A little bit more about this current switch. So what Class A amplifiers mean is that the amplifying transistors within the amplifier design are biased, which means that they always have some current flowing through it and that it's always active. And so that basically means that when you have a Class A bias, that means that the amplifier is always running, always on, and it's basically always going to be drawing current from whatever source. So as a portable headphone amplifier that runs on a battery power, you're going to have some limitations for the battery life because of that design. And so when you have the Class A switch on low, which is 20 milliamps, that's going to make the battery life last about 9 hours. If you switch it to the high mode, which is about 40 milliamps, you get a battery life of around 5 hours. So you do see a difference in terms of the battery life, and that's because the bias of the Class A amplifiers always going to be conducting current, and it's going to change depending on how much current you draw. For the switch itself, in terms of the sound, I actually prefer the 20 milliamp mode compared to the 40 milliamp mode, and the differences I hear between 20 and 40 is that when you switch to 40, the soundstage depth actually increases. So instead of having a really wide soundstage, you get a little bit more depth. However, I do find that the soundstage does become a lot wider, and the imaging becomes very stereotypical of stereo, pun intended. So very hard on the left, like so, and very hard on the right, like so. The center imaging is a little bit weird. I find it to be lacking compared to the 20 milliamp mode. So that's why I prefer the 20 milliamp mode, because the 20 milliamp mode does have good center imaging, like so. I'm talking directly behind you and slightly above. So the B1 in the 20 milliamp mode would be more like this, whereas in the 40 milliamp mode, it would be more like this. And I just thought that was really weird. Also in the 40 milliamp mode, I find that the bass definition becomes a little bit higher, or not definition, bass presence becomes a little bit higher, so you get a little more warmth between the upper bass and the lower mid-range, and you get a little bit more sub-bass boost. I wouldn't call it a bass boost by any means, but I can hear a little bit more of the sub-bass when using the 40 milliamp mode. Okay, so that covers the sound quality. I'm going to talk about a little bit of the appearance of the B1, because I do think that the B1 is a very beautifully crafted unit. So on the back here, the red accents are actually synthetic leather, and they are stickers, so it's not very high quality, but it does look very nice on the appearance level. On the metal itself, you can see that there's the logo and the branding for the B1, and that's laser etched. So there's Aune B1 headphone amp, and then you get a serial number where it's made on the front, as well as the brand and logo. On the side, there's a battery button, so when you push it, you can see how many times the LED blinks, and that indicates the battery life. So that's 2 blinks, and 4 blinks is 100%. On here you see the power switch, and when you switch the power on or off, it actually activates a mute relay, which you can hear. So that's the clicking. And you can tell that the B1 is on by the LEDs on the front there, which are green. And I'll switch it off and you can hear the relays again. So it does have some nice protection for your headphones. On the front here, or the top rather, you have your input and your headphone output. The input maximum voltage is 2 volts RMS, which is about typical for a portable headphone amplifier. The volume knob is flush with the metal here. I'm not sure if the camera will get that to focus, but it is touching the top and bottom of this metal chassis. So when you turn it, it does rub against it, and it does have variable resistance. So right now it's very smooth, pretty good. Then as you turn higher, it gets really stiff near the end because it's scraping against the metal. This volume knob is made of plastic, so it's not super high quality volume knob. Also, if you look at the placement of the volume knob compared to the input and output, if you have 90-degree jacks, you're not going to get very much space to adjust the volume, and I found that to be kind of annoying. However, it does work pretty well if you just have it on a desktop setup, and you can just adjust the volume from the top or the bottom, not really holding the volume knob itself. On the front here, we have this cool window, and basically this window kind of showcases the components used within the B1. There are a lot of interesting things that you can see inside of it. For instance, these, let's see if we can get the camera to focus. Basically, those black rectangles with the 3 silver dots, those are transistors, and the B1's design is all discrete. There are no ICs or integrated circuit components within the B1, so there are no operational amplifiers, which is very typical of a headphone amplifier. Everything is discrete here. All the components used are either resistor, transistor, inductor, capacitor. So it's basically the basic components of electronics, and there are no specially made packaged components, which is what IC components are. Inside of this, you can also see, get that to focus, the resistors there. Those are pretty special. I don't know if you can technically see it on the screen because there's reflections, but those resistors are very special resistors. They have no leads. They're called MELF resistors, which is metal electrode leadless face. So basically it's just a very cylindrical resistor with no leads that you can put through a PCB and solder on. You have to kind of dab some solder onto it and then solder that to the board. So it's a very special kind of resistor, and it's not very commonly used, especially in this price bracket. I was surprised that it even had them. So very cool window. And in terms of usability, earlier I mentioned that the B1 is portable, in quotes, because I find this to be a very large unit overall. This is a pretty regular sized unit in terms of width and height, kind of similar to the Objective DAC, maybe a little bit taller, similar to the FiiO E12. Yeah, it's basically the same size as the FiiO E12 in terms of height and length. And the OPPO HA-2 is a little bit wider and also taller. However, one thing that I think the B1 is terrible for is its width, and it's pretty darn thick. If you put this in your pocket, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. It's definitely not as thick as the Objective 2, but it's actually kind of close, about 75% of its width. And so it's a very thick portable headphone amplifier. And for that reason, I don't think I would consider the B1 to be portable. I would classify it more as transportable, and you would bring this in your backpack or something and set it up in a system that I would consider semi-portable, like in a laptop in a library setting, or maybe you're going to bring this to a friend's house, so you would carry this to your friend's house in a backpack or something, not really in your pocket. If you look at the design of the B1, basically the entire chassis is exposed. It doesn't come with any rubber feet, so if you do intend to stack this on something, I'd recommend you put rubber feet on it and stack it either on the top like that or on the bottom. If you don't have rubber feet, basically the B1's going to be scratching all over it, like so. And yeah, it's probably not good for your electronics to do something like that. So do include some protection for your devices. I would not recommend putting this in the pocket because it's so thick, and it's just a portable headphone amplifier, so you need to connect it to something else. And if you have something else connected to it, it's going to be really thick now in your pocket, and that's not really going to fit. The B1 is about the same thickness as my Nintendo 3DS portable handheld gaming console, and I already find that to be pretty much on the border of pocketable. So not really a portable headphone amplifier in my opinion, but it is transportable. Also, regarding the all metal chassis, this entire frame is basically made of aluminum, which is nice. It's kind of sturdy, not really bulletproof, because I accidentally dropped the B1. It landed on a glass lamp, and as a result of that, the edge of the frame here got chipped up pretty bad. So it's not a completely bulletproof design, and the aluminum seems to be pretty soft, so not a good thing there, but it is a nice design overall. I think something more along the machine, very sturdy enclosure of the JDS Labs Objective 2, Objective DAC, and C5 and C5D are a little more sturdy in that regard, although they don't look as beautiful because this is custom crafted. So overall, that is my review of the Aune B1 portable headphone amplifier. Again, I want to thank Aune for letting me be a part of this tour. So if you have any questions or want some more comparisons between the different amplifiers that I did with the AB switch here, you can go ahead and leave a comment below. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you guys soon.